episode of Surviving the Survivor, we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to the second live episode of Surviving the Survivor in as many hours. We are the podcast that promises and delivers in bringing you the very best guests in all of true crime. And not only that, we pivot third live. I did a lunch live. This is true. And we pivot with news because the COE and I are both news people. That's our background. And I told the COE, I said this on the last show, I just told the guests, I'm going to say it again. I said, if I go to the Sarah Boone trial, all hell is going to break loose. And it has. We've got news with the Menendez brothers, which is why we're here. We've got news with Diddy, who's got more lawsuits that are incredibly disturbing. Charlie Adelson's appeal is suddenly going to be handed in as soon as tomorrow. And of course, the Menendez brothers, which is what we're here to talk about. So welcome to one and all. Thank you for being here and appreciate the support. Lyle and Erik Menendez, for those who have been living, in the far off outback somewhere in Australia and have never heard of them. They were convicted of the grisly 1989 shotgun murders of their parents, Jose and Mary Louise, otherwise known as Kitty Menendez. This happened at the family's sprawling Beverly Hills mansion. They've been in prison basically ever since for the last 35 years. The question now is, do they have a shot at freedom? The LA District Attorney, a guy named George Gascon, is holding a major press conference tomorrow, and it relates to resentencing the brothers. And Vanity Fair has a scoop on this, saying that they will be freed in this resentencing. A lot of things to talk about, including how do you get there if you're sentenced to life without parole. We'll ask the guests all these questions. You've got an active a sitting district attorney general, that is General Mark Davidson, who comes to us from Tennessee, elected to district attorney general in August of 2018. Chris Lomax comes back to us. He was here for Diddy last week. I asked him if he'd come back, and here he is. He is the managing attorney at Lomax Legal. He began his career with the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice, otherwise known as the DOJ, and now he's got his own law firm. So there you go. Josh Ritter, he is a criminal defense attorney in Los Angeles. Perhaps most importantly, the host of Courtroom Confidential, and he was Prosecutor of the Year, an award-winning former prosecutor, and he lives in Los Angeles. Josh Ritter, before we get to the Menendez brothers, who is George Gascon? What is his reputation in the county that is LA?
George Gascon is the current DA in Los Angeles. He won in a very hotly contested election against who was the current DA, Jackie Lacey, who had been there for 3 terms. And he came in and shook things up for sure. A lot of people wanted that. He caused a lot of kind of controversy because he undid a lot of policies, changed the way things were done, and now he's in another very hotly contested election coming up here in November. That, everybody's paying attention to the nationwide elections here in Los Angeles. A lot of people are paying attention to that election because the DA has caught a lot of attention over some of the decisions he made over the last 4 years. And so that's kind of, I think, a little bit of a motivating factor in my view as to why we're all of a sudden getting now multiple press conferences regarding the Menendez brothers with November lurking around the corner.
Interesting take. It's pretty, I don't want to say obvious. It should have been obvious to me, but wasn't even thinking about that. And that is an excellent point. These are elected officials, and it's always about either the money or the politics. And in this case, Josh intimating, not so gently, that it is the politics of the panel. And as always, Joel and COE, you guys are seriously the best show, by far my favorite YouTube channel. I'm usually watching later, but made it to a live. Thank you so much for Mrs. Paradise. Chris Lomax, to you, and then we will get to the sitting district attorney. Life without parole, that was their sentence. At the time, Lyle Menendez was 21 years old, Erik Menendez, 18. Today, Lyle's 56, Erik, 53. From a legal perspective, how are they getting a second shot at freedom if it was a sentence of life without parole?
Well, there's not much that's ever completely final in this fluid world that we call the legal system. Information may reveal itself that would enable a defense attorney to submit information to the court that would ask the court to reconsider the position that it took in the sentence. Obviously, in connection with the DA's office, there could be cooperation there and agreement. There are habeas petitions that can be filed and other forms of relief that can be sought, essentially saying to the court, hey, we think you may have gotten this wrong. Here's the information that we have now that you didn't have available to you then, or it wasn't considered in the appropriate way. Don't let two men sit in jail for the rest of their lives when perhaps a more appropriate sentence could have been handed down if this information was considered or if it was considered properly in its full scope.
By the way, this is never a truer statement than this one. Shout out to Space Coast on the West Coast. 1-1, Spacey. The Mets got that game back after getting crushed the first night. He's got a lot of editing to do this week with so much news and so many shows, plus the trial starting soon. Also to Steve Cohen, who's amazing at his job, which is getting us the best guests in true crime. And we got the best mods. I always say that. We got the best community. Shout out there to Meave Moen. Of course, the COE keeps, she is the glue that keeps us all together. It's a lot of work, and appreciate the support. You can subscribe. You can hit the like button, and we've got a Patreon link as well. If you want to support us there, it would be much appreciated. Again, these two brothers, and they were reunited a bunch of years back after being, I think, apart for well over 2 decades. But they've spent 35 years behind bars, and the family, and this is according to sources close to the family. One of them, one of the publications is Vanity Fair. They say, and this is also coming from Mark Garagos, who is now representing them in some fashion, that the family members have always thought that they should have been charged with a manslaughter charge rather than murder in the first. I guess it's easy to say that in retrospect, but General Mark, to you, they were charged with first-degree murder. Do you think it was too harsh a penalty to begin with?
No.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
Well, I've done some criminal defense too in my time. I know there's always two sides to every story, but they gunned down their parents in cold blood while they were eating ice cream and berries. And they had 2 jury trials, and the second jury that heard this case found them guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced them to life without parole. So, at what point can we expect to have some finality here? Here we are 35 years later, and we're talking about resentencing defendants after a jury of 12 people already heard this case, heard the evidence. They had 2 shots to try to present their best defense. And what we're hearing now really doesn't fit with the facts of the case at the time it was prosecuted. I know I've read in media reports that prosecutors at the time saw no evidence of these claims of this childhood abuse. So, this is unfortunate to see. I understand California has some mechanism to do this under Penal Code 1172.1, and I'm sure Josh knows more about that than I do, where you can apply for resentencing. The nuts and bolts of that are a little beyond me, but this seems like terrible policy for victims of crimes to have to see something like this pop up 35 years later. And I'm speaking generally, not just about this case.
Well put. Shadow Jones here to Josh. The second trial was not fair and did not mention the abuse. Again, tomorrow night, we've got the legend, Dr. Ann Burgess, who was a witness at the original trial. The first trials it was a mistrial. It was the first trial, I should say. The second trial, they were tried together by a single jury, and they found him guilty. But Josh, at that point, none of these allegations of abuse by the parents could come in. Again, this goes back to the early 90s. That would never happen today, I don't think. That was obviously a huge factor, wasn't it?
It was huge. It wasn't that it was kept out entirely, but it was dramatically cut down. Erik still testified in the second trial, and he still talked about the abuse. But in the first trial, they were permitted by the judge to have dozens of witnesses, family members going back, years, talking about how the boys had been complaining about abuse. Complaining is not the right word. Making allegations about abuse since they were very young. And a lot of that, the vast majority of that, was all kept out. They had experts and everything else. And the judge felt that there was not a proper nexus between the abuse and the crimes to allow it in. But more important than that, what the judge didn't allow was them to have an instruction on imperfect self-defense. And therefore, the availability of even manslaughter as a option was not presented to that second jury. So that second jury only had the choice between first-degree murder or a flat-out acquittal. And without that other evidence of abuse, and without even understanding what to do with the evidence of abuse, they were really left with a choice of, do we find these men who basically confess to committing these murders not guilty and walk them out the door? Do we find them and hold them responsible? And that's what the second jury felt, that their hands were sort of tied in that situation. So a lot of people have pointed to that kind of 180 that the judge made in between those two trials as being pivotal. I think it absolutely was. I don't think there's any question that it changed the landscape entirely between those two trials. And that was, a lot of other factors I think went into that decision, but that is a decision that has been highly criticized ever since then. Not so much, my point is always not been that the boys should have been found not guilty. I think that's a misnomer, that a lot of people think that they were trying to argue even to be found not guilty. They had always been arguing for a manslaughter, some sort of responsibility. They just felt that the abuse that they had suffered was a mitigating factor that should have been considered by the jury, but there was no option of that in the second trial.
Chris, this and obviously Josh has a really good grasp on this. He lives in LA and has obviously followed it really closely. Chris, there's a question that always comes up, or a comment, and it basically goes like this: if Lyle and Erik were young girls at the time, they would have been out years ago. Is there any credence to that, do you think?
So it's hard to say, right? We're looking into a crystal ball and trying to decide what would have happened to someone if they were someone else. However, the general sentiment around that notion that sexual abuse as it relates to girls is viewed differently than it is as it relates to boys. I think there is some truth to that. For some reason, we view children who are male different than we do children who are female. As a young boy, if you go out and have some exploit with a teenager or a young woman, you get a pat on the back. If you're a girl and a grown man or an older teenager touches you, then it's a crime, and that person needs to go to jail and be thrown under the jail. So in the context of this case, I do think that there is an issue related to sexual abuse of boys and how it is viewed, particularly in the context of a family member. This was supposedly their father molesting them and abusing them, and the psychological impact that would have on any person, whether male or female, is something that always should be considered, I think, as a mitigating factor when they've been charged with a crime.
Seeing a lot of comments about George Gascon. The press conference again is going to be held tomorrow. He's a DA in LA, and basically a parallel job to what the general has in Tennessee. Forget the subject matter, Mark, but if you were going to hold a press conference, very weighty press conference, what kind of preparation goes into this? What is he doing behind the scenes here?
Well, I feel certain he has something he's prepared to announce. He's called a press conference, and you wouldn't do that for no reason. So I was looking at an article, I guess from Fox 11, where he's already talking about to the media about some evidence, what he calls newly discovered evidence, in the form
Which,
of
by the way, is not new, but we'll get into that.
Right. So my expectation here is that he's going to announce something that's going to be probably along the lines of what the family's hoping for. Don't know why else he'd be holding a press conference on a case that's, it's not a whodunit. So it looks like he's up to something.
Yeah. I've shared this story before many times, but I grew up, small world, playing tennis on court number 2. They were on court number 1 at the East Brunswick Racket Club in East Brunswick, New Jersey. This is before they moved to LA. They grew up in Princeton, New Jersey. They were amazing tennis players, really athletic. But I have friends who had been to a couple parties at the Menendez's house when we were in high school. And the stories that I was told, and these are obviously secondhand, there's a example of one of the stories that was told to me was they were at Lyle and Erik's house. It was a party while the parents were away. And one of the people there, a friend of mine, a person that I know, actually spilled wine on a white carpet. And they said that the reaction was crazy. Like, it was not a normal reaction. It was incredible fear of what could happen to them. And I have a lot of friends who knew them. My tennis coach was their tennis coach. They do believe strongly that they were being abused in some fashion. They don't know if it was sexually, physically, mentally, but that's what I can offer up there. And it's kind of a story that's haunted my part of where I grew up in New Jersey for 3+ decades. I can remember I was overseas in college, and friends of mine sending me an article, like big feature articles. It was so surreal having literally played tennis next to them. It's hard to explain how good they were. I mean, they were at a level where they could have probably gone pro if they wanted to. But so that's just a little color from my side. But Josh Ritter, back to this guy, George Gascon. What kind of legal recourse does he actually have? I mean, does he have the power to say you are able to walk out of prison today? Can he do that?
Not directly, not as straightforward as you just said it. He can make a request of the court to have these men resentenced. He can say that, upon considering the evidence that they have submitted to them in the habeas petition, that the district attorney has, reevaluated their position, and that they would like to have them resentenced on a voluntary manslaughter, which, by the way, means they would have more than enough time served at this point, and they would be released. The other thing that they could do is, submit some sort of brief in support of the habeas petition, and then just kind of leave it in the hands of the court to make the decision, to kind of take some of the heat perhaps off of Gascon as far as the actual decision making, and say, we're going to support their petition with the court and allow the court to, use whatever legal bases they find fit to make their decision. But I kind of tend to agree with everyone that if he's calling, this is press conference number 2 now. And Joel, just to clarify, is it clear that he is the one calling this conference and has invited the family members? That I read that in a report.
Yeah, that's what has been reported, that he is holding this press conference and has invited family members from outside California who are reported to be flying to LA this evening. So you're not going to be flying in from out of state if you're, and I'm not sure exactly who they keep in touch with. I think cousins and, obviously some members of their family, but they're making the effort. I don't know where they're coming from, but that's got to be a big deal, right, Josh, for them to fly out?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that I can't imagine they'd be putting all this fanfare together if it wasn't some pretty phenomenal announcement that they're about to make. But again, I do think that the way it would have to work from a logistic perspective is that he would petition the court either for a resentencing
Mm-hmm.
or join in their habeas petition, and then the courts themselves, I think, are the ones where the power actually lays to actually make a decision and do something about this.
So the new evidence, General Mark, is he's citing, this is the LA District Attorney, he's citing this letter as being new evidence, but it's something that came out in a documentary last year that had to do with the band Menudo and the Menendez brothers and a member of that band, basically talking about being abused by Jose Menendez as well. The letter is from Erik to his cousin, who's now deceased, a guy named Andy Cano, in which he is reportedly describing this direct abuse from the father. This is a bit old. It's not new. In your opinion, Mark, how important is this letter? Is this much ado about nothing? Is it something that was missed for 3+ decades, and as a result, they've been unjustly incarcerated? What do you think?
Well, in Tennessee, and I'm sure in California, the Menendez brothers would have had multiple levels of appeals available to them, a direct appeal of their conviction and sentence. They would have had the opportunity to file a post-conviction petition or something of that nature in California, I'm sure. They've been unsuccessful over 35 years with their appeals, and this is really not brand new evidence. And so, if that's enough to get a life without parole sentence overturned after a jury of 12 people found you guilty, and that's what you were sentenced to, then that concerns me, that little evidence can result in what's being called a resentencing. Now, Josh has mentioned a habeas corpus petition. I'm not familiar with them having filed that, but those are usually unsuccessful. You typically have to prove that you're being held illegally under an illegal sentence, which is not the case here at all. So it looks to me like we're talking about a resentencing, which the DA can recommend, and then a judge would have to decide. So my guess is we'll hear at the press conference that the DA is probably going to recommend it, and then we'll see what a judge makes of this this so-called evidence.
Yeah, I'm getting right back to Mr. Lomax in a moment, but Josh Ritter, real quick. I mean, and forgive me if you just said it, because I'm a little dazed and confused, but is there any chance that they walk out of prison tomorrow?
I don't think it'll be that quick, but I think the quickest way you could see something like that happen is if the DA is announcing tomorrow that they are going to request the court for a resentencing. That hearing will be put on calendar in front of a judge quickly, within a matter of weeks, I suppose, and then a hearing will be held on that. And if you've got, the basis for it to some extent, in the sense that they do believe they have this new evidence, and you have the prosecuting agency joining in that request, if not making that request on their behalf, I imagine it will be just up to a judge to kind of, sign the paperwork and make the order. And once that order is made, they will be credited for their time served. And the next order the judge will make is for their release. So, we're talking about maybe moving as quickly as before the end of the year.
Wow. So it's not going to be tomorrow, but it could be in the next couple of months. The COE here, nearly 24 family members of Erik and Lyle Menendez will speak at this news conference, which we're going to take live on this channel in downtown LA tomorrow, to discuss the ongoing review of the brothers' cases. I did not know they were keeping in touch with that many members. That's 24 people, members of their family. That's a lot of people showing up to support them. It's kind of amazing after all this time. By the way, my man Myron in Miami was calling out these 80s and 90s haircut, but Lyle Menendez, he lost his hair early. That's a toupee. That's why it looks a little nutty, but he lost that hair early. Chris Lomax, to you with a full head of hair. This whole thing with Gascon, it says here that it is his moral and ethical obligation to review the Menendez brothers' case because it's been 35 years since their sentencing. Is that really true that it's his moral and ethical obligation, or is he just being a politician by saying this?
Well, I guess the question is, does he believe that is his moral and ethical obligation versus whether it is actually his moral and ethical obligation under the law? I don't think the law in his office calls him to follow any particular moral code or standard, but instead to enforce the law. And so it seems as though he's reaching into areas beyond what the office calls for. And we, none of us leave our morals and ethics at the door when we walk into the office every day, but there should be some consistency around the way that he performs his job and the way that the office is held for people in his position. Obviously, we heard earlier that, for crime victims and for other people who have been subjected to all types of unlawful conduct, there has to be a consideration of how they feel about this. It's interesting that the family members have come out in support of the brothers, because those are also family members of the parents. And so oftentimes as a prosecutor, you want to know, well, what would the victim want? And if that victim is deceased, the only way to find that out perhaps is to talk to the family members. In this situation, the family members are shared between the perpetrator of the crime and the victim of the crime. So it creates a bit of cognitive dissonance. What seems to be the case, and we haven't heard about any dissenting views among the family members, but what seems to be the case is that the family members are saying that this is enough time. These men have served their time and they should be released given the circumstances.
Josh, by the way, I know Lyle was married. Do you know if I think they're both married. I know Erik was married too. Are they both still married? Do you have any idea, Josh?
I don't. I believe that you're right, though. I think at one point they were both married, but I'm not sure of that now.
Yeah, I never fully understand prison marriages, how that works. But who am I? I don't know. Maybe it's great because you're
Distance makes the heart grow fonder.
Yes, yeah. There you go, Chris. Yeah, I had an Uncle Simon, great Uncle Simon, and Aunt Irene, who both lived, I think, over 100 years old. They lived in Los Angeles, and at 93 years old, they were in their early 90s when they decided the earthquakes in LA were too much. I think this was after the 89 Northridge quake, Josh Ritter, and if that's the right date. And they packed up a U-Haul and moved to Las Vegas. So they were like a quirky, cool couple. And I used to ask Carm, my beloved mom, have they been together for so long? And my dad, I would ask the same question. They said it's simple. They had separate beds, and one was a night owl and one was a morning person. So they rarely crossed paths. So there you go. I'll get in trouble with the COE now. From North Star here. Life sentences get reevaluated and reduced all the time based on a slew of circumstances. Justice does not end at final sentencing. It's an evolving process, thank God. This is exactly, in so many words, what Chris just said. General, is this true? Should it be this way?
With all due respect to North Star, that's not really accurate. Most convictions end in convictions. Very few cases could get reversed or resentenced or overturned on appeal. The percentage of, and I've done appellate work, it's a very small percentage of cases. Now she's right. Courts do. We have a very good system in the United States, and we do a lot of review. Defendants have a lot of rights enshrined in our Bill of Rights. Victims get very frustrated sometimes with all the rights that they see afforded to defendants and the process that's afforded to them that they go through. But we have a great system in the United States. It's the best in the world, in my opinion. It's not flawless, but no human-built system can be. But it's great, and they have been afforded ample appeals and opportunities to challenge their convictions and sentences. So I can't necessarily agree with North Star on that particular point.
You see there, Erik has been married since 1999, well before I got married. And they say that both wives will be there tomorrow. This is going to be held, Josh Ritter, at the Clara Shortridge Foltz Criminal Justice Center. Shout out to Clara Shortridge Foltz. I have no idea who she is, but at one time I bet you she had a lot of money, and that's why the building's named after her. Or she did something really cool. But Josh, first of all, tell us a little bit about this, where this is going to be held. And in kind of typical LA fashion, sounds like this is going to be a very Hollywood-esque production where we're hearing 24 members of the family, the wives. How important is it for Gascon here to put on the, proverbial show to help his cause in getting them off?
Yeah, well, the Claridge Fulridge Short building is, everybody just calls it CCB, the Criminal Court Building. It is the main building downtown Los Angeles where every single major trial you've ever heard about, aside from Manson, was tried in that courtroom, except actually the Menendez brothers. They were tried in Van Nuys or San Fernando, pardon me, a different courthouse. Van Nuys, pardon me. But OJ, every major trial that you've heard about has taken place outside of CCB. It's across the street from the Hall of Justice where the DA's office is. It's the hub of the criminal courts here in Los Angeles and the likely location of where they would have this press conference. But yeah, Gascon, I think, I've already kind of made my comments about perhaps some motivations why he wants to get in front of some TV cameras, but also Mark Garagos is no stranger to understanding publicity and PR, and I think he realizes that getting an array of microphones in front of him, along with a group of family members behind him to kind of push. There's a groundswell of people who are pushing towards this. I mean, part of the reason we're all talking about this is there has been a large movement on social media and TikTok and recent documentaries and the Netflix series. It seems like this case has just really found a new life. I think that habeas that was filed early last year played a role in that, but I also think that this is kind of the perfect storm, right time for them to perhaps have this moment. And as Mark pointed out, the only reason why they even have this habeas is your last ditch effort. They have had all their appeals. One of the criteria for bringing a habeas petition is that you've exhausted all of your other appeals, which they have done. So this habeas, if they're not successful on it, or they cannot convince the DA to take some sort of independent action, that's really the end of the road for them. And they brought this habeas based upon, those two new pieces of evidence that you are going to get into. But one of those being that letter, and the other being another individual coming forward talking about the abuse. And if I don't want to suck up too much time, but if I could talk about why I feel the main point I think that was made in that habeas that was, to me at least, the most kind of moving, not saying it convinced me, but saying that it at least had the most teeth behind it, was in the second trial. Not only were the defense precluded from arguing imperfect self-defense, from bringing much of their evidence about the abuse, but the prosecution was also allowed to make arguments saying that no corroborating evidence of abuse existed. And that, to me, may have been a step too far. It's one thing to say, based upon evidentiary rulings, that this evidence isn't going to be allowed in, but then it's another thing to say that evidence simply doesn't exist. And that's what the prosecution was allowed to argue to the jurors. So that second jury just felt that there was no one to corroborate the testimony given by Erik of this abuse. And their part of this habeas argument is that, hey, yes, there was, and in fact, we have new evidence to corroborate it, and therefore that is why this argument should be entertained. So, not to get too much into the legal weeds behind it, but it's one of those habeas petitions which I, again, agree with Mark, usually have a very slim chance at all of being successful. At least this one had some merit behind it.
By the way, Ann Burgess interviewed Erik, so she's going to be here tomorrow night, and it was her belief that he was severely abused, and she is a world expert, a literal living legend. She'll be our guest tomorrow night, 7:00. Carrie Lassiter, the mom was abusive too. This has been reported. A lot of people have accused the mother, at the very least, of turning a blind eye to Jose's alleged abuse. Real quick from Olive Green, Joel, what was her reputation at the tennis club? Were they nice, arrogant? They were like a pedigree above. First of all, they were from Princeton, which is a very kind of preppy town, Ivy League town. They were physical specimens. You see the documentary that's out now. I think it's called Monsters. Those guys are ripped and shredded in that documentary. The Menendez brothers were like that in real life. They were physical specimens, strong, amazing athletes. I mean, really next level tennis players that who could have gone, played professionally, but they were a little standoffish. But if you got in their circle, as my friends did, they were friendly, and they got along, and did whatever high school kids did until they moved out to Beverly Hills, and then it all changed. But to Chris, to you, if they are in fact freed and this DA gets his way, I mean, what kind of precedent does this set moving forward? Because right now, also in California, got Scott Peterson convicted of murdering Lacey, who was at one point sentenced to death, serving a life sentence. And now they're saying there's new evidence in that case. Interestingly, Mark Garagos is attached to that too. And by the way, Steve Cohen is trying to get Mark on the show. He's been on the show before, and I'm sure we will get him once the crazy media crush ends. But what kind of precedent does this set, not only in California, but possibly nationally here, Chris?
I think we're wondering about what kind of precedent it sets because these guys are famous. But I assure you that they're not the only ones filing these types of petitions and seeking this type of relief. I think if we cabin this to the media-driven justice system, then perhaps more people who are notable public figures will seek this type of media-driven exchange. But people who are in jail are constantly filing anything and everything that they can to be released from prison, because prison is a horrible place to be. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so if you are in prison, you're going to be doing everything you can to get out. That is the same for a person who is poor, a person who is middle class, and a person who is rich. And obviously, a person who is rich and famous has a lot more resources to drive that boat all the way as far as it can possibly go. So I don't think it's going to set any new precedent. I think people have been doing this for, ages, and they will continue to do so long as they are incarcerated. So I don't think it's going to change much at all.
That's interesting. And Myron Sanchez, my man Myron, they took justice into their own hands by murdering them while they were eating ice cream, and they planned all this too. Others are saying, please free the Menendez brothers. So it's interesting how polarizing this is. Chris, I'm just coming back to you. Someone made a comment earlier, and I agree with it. And again, I'm going to invoke the Shawshank Redemption. The old guy is freed, and he cannot adjust to life on the outside. I don't think, we look at life, just in a flash when we're looking back on it, almost like when you're flipping the pages of a book. But these guys have been institutionalized since, I want to say, they've been in jail since '89. So I guess they've been incarcerated that whole time. That's a hell of a long time. How difficult do you think it's going to be for them if they are released into society? Some people are saying that they look like nice guys. Others are saying they look shady and could be a problem in society. But how do they go about and live their lives if this does happen?
I think there should be a process, right? And usually the criminal justice system does have a process for reintegrating people into society. There are halfway houses, there's supervised release, there's reporting, there's counseling. There are a lot of conditions that can be imposed to ensure, or at least try to ensure, that people don't reoffend or put themselves in position to reoffend. We're not talking about a drug case or someone who was addicted to something here. We're talking about people who were convicted of murder. So our chief concern, I think, is whether they will go out and murder someone else. Well, in a situation like this, where the people who they murdered were their parents, and their parents were allegedly abusing them, it's hard to envision a scenario where this situation would be replicated. They also spent 35 years approximately, I believe, in jail, and they probably got a good dose of all that comes with that, and are not looking forward to going back. At the end of the day, though, people reoffend. Recidivism is a problem. And so it's not impossible that they would do something because they haven't been living their lives in a place where they can be free and make choices and have autonomy. But I don't think that this is a case where them repeating the same set of circumstances is a huge risk, just because of how specific the crime was. And I don't think they had a ton of criminal history before this. So that's just my view on it.
Yeah, I mean, they were stealing things leading up to this. So I think they may have been headed in that direction, but who knows, why young people act out. Could be for a number of reasons. Susan Lynn here, Josh, this is interesting. So Leslie Abramson was her criminal defense attorney, and she was incredibly savvy and smart. I don't know. She's definitely still around LA. Has she made a statement about this? I have not seen one. Josh, do we know anything about Leslie Abramson today? Is she still practicing? She was kind of a legend back in the day.
She was a legend back in the day. And she famously kind of dropped out of talking about this case at all. I do not believe she is practicing at all to this day.
Did she ever explain why she suddenly just stopped talking about it?
She did she did some press afterwards, and she did quite a few interviews, but then she just stopped. And I think her statements since that time have kind of been, I've said everything I have to say about this. She was a very strong-willed person, and she just made up her mind. She's done talking about it and said everything she's had to say. So I know that with all these new documentaries, everybody's been kind of reaching out and trying to get a hold of her, and no one has been successful in that. Maybe Joel, maybe you can make some phone calls or something and get her.
Steve Cohen, I know you're listening.
Steve,
let's try to
get her on
Leslie
the show. But yeah, she I know that a lot of people want to hear from her, especially if there's actually going to be an announcement tomorrow. But she's dropped off of the map for some time.
If anyone can do it, Steve Cohen, he's probably on line 3 with her right now. Cohen has 17 cell phones. That's how he operates. He's got to have 17 cell phones. From Crafty Chris, I'll ask you, Josh, since you're in California, does California have these son of Sam laws to prevent from benefiting from crimes like these? Does that exist in California, the land of the celebrity?
Yeah, if people are worried that somehow they're going to turn to profiting off of this, no, there are those same laws in effect. And have been in effect. I mean, because they've had an opportunity to, I'm sure, give several interviews, and they have since their time in, but they've not been able to profit off of any of that.
And Mark, I know you're an active sitting district attorney, but you look here, please free them. And then I just saw my man Myron say murder is murder. I know I'm not supposed to use that word. But Mark, why do you think the incredible division when it comes to this case? It's really polarizing. It's almost like politics.
It seems to me there's as Chris has mentioned, a level of celebrity, this kind of putting this case in a different light. I'm sure, as Chris said, there's a whole lot of people out there filing these same petitions who are saying, wait a second, what about me, right? How come the Menendez brothers or Scott Peterson get all of this media attention and these lawyers and so forth and so on. And that kind of brings me back to my point that our system is, and I know the viewers will disagree on this to some degree, but our system is, again, it's the best in the world. It's not perfect, but it's designed for everybody, right? Everybody has the same ability to challenge their convictions, challenge their sentences on appeal. The Menendez brothers had these opportunities. Those have passed. They were unsuccessful. This case has been reviewed multiple times. And so here we are with what looks like to me at the end of the day, a kind of celebrity-driven movement to take a second look at a case that a lot of other people wish they could have happen to them too.
Yeah. I pray this isn't true, but I fear it is. From Vesper Martini, Rosie O'Donnell will also be at the press conference. Josh, Josh Ritter, have you heard this? Is Rosie showing up for some reason?
I know Rosie is a part of this kind of push because she's a big time advocate of
Oh boy,
survivors of abuse. And the reason I know that is I was actually a part of a documentary series that was dealing with the Menendez brothers, and she was one of the people who was interviewed. So I'm not shocked if she's going to be there. I know that she has been kind of part of this overall push and cause.
Two questions for Mr. Lomax. From Alyssa, this is a comment. Maybe one day you can do a show on what makes women attracted to convicted killers. Wade Wilson has hundreds of women all around. They all do. Chris Lomax, as you can tell, I know the guy was a ladies' man in his day, but now he is a devoted husband, never looks at anyone. He's got those horse blinders on. What is it about certain women that like these bad boys, Chris Lomax? What is your theory? I know you're not a psychologist, but I had to ask you.
I think we can all remember in high school, nice guys finish last, right? so I guess that in reverse, if we take the logic, who finishes first, right? So I think that people, right, I won't even limit it to women. The same could be said about any other person, are attracted to folks who are risk takers, who are dangerous, who are willing to toe the line. There's something exciting about it. People don't like the mundane. If you ate, today my kids had grilled cheese for dinner. I think after a while, if I kept giving them grilled cheese, they would object, even though they say they love it, right? They want to mix it up a bit. And so for better or for worse, people who add a little spice to life seem to get the girl or the guy.
This is a super chat here. To me, Mark, this is for you. A jury verdict is not sacrosanct. They've definitely been known to get it wrong. Interesting. I actually read it the other way, that it is sacrosanct. What do you think? Which way do you see it?
I think jury verdicts are pretty sacrosanct myself. It takes a lot of work to get a conviction in front of a jury of 12 people unanimously beyond a reasonable doubt. To do that is it's a challenge. The prosecution, and I know everybody here would agree, we don't bring these cases lightly. If we're going in front of a jury, we're planning to bring the goods, and we believe 100% that the defendant is guilty. And in my almost 30 years of practice, I've not had a case overturned. And I'm not, I understand the viewer's point. There are occasions where we do see cases overturned. But in the grand scheme of things, the number of cases that we handle, thousands of cases a year, we get it right most of the time. Okay. So, jury verdicts to me are very special. It takes a lot of work, not just on the behalf of the prosecution, but the defense lawyer, the judge, the bailiffs, and the jurors. Let's not forget about the service that jurors provide to us in America. It's a great system again. And so I find it troubling that here we are talking about undoing something that a jury listened to and did on this case.
And I'm watching that jury system play out with jury selection here in Orlando at the Sarah Boone trial, and it is a big obligation. They want these people to leave their lives for 2.5 weeks. I was talking in the earlier show about just amazing how complicated human beings are with all kinds of issues. People have travel plans, people have doctor's appointments, people have kids at school. And so it is a big responsibility and a big sacrifice to do that. But they say it is the best system in the world, and I would have to agree with that. You see here, too, from me, Queen, it's so unfair that OJ was released and they were given life. Well, he was acquitted because the glove did not fit, then convicted again. But they were given life without parole. It's not justice. It's who had the most money, and only if you're famous. Well, I'll tell you what, the Menendez brothers are pretty famous, and at one point, very well off. We are virtually, this is a statement the COE is putting up, Joan Anderson Vandermolen, the sister of Kitty Menendez. So this is their aunt. We are virtually the entire extended family of Erik and Lyle Menendez. We are 24 strong, and today we want the world to know we support Erik and Lyle. We individually and collectively pray for their release after being imprisoned for 35 years. We know them, love them, and want them home with us. Ryan Murphy's Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story, is a phobic, gross, anachronistic, serial, episodic nightmare that is not only riddled with mistruths and outright falsehoods, but ignores the most recent exculpatory revelations. Our family has been victimized by this grotesque shock-a-drama. Murphy claims he spent years researching the case, but in the end relied on debunked Dominic Dunn, the pro-prosecution hack, to justify his slander against us and never spoke to us. That is a harsh and very well written statement referring to the show Monsters, the docuseries that is on Netflix right now. Ryan Murphy is also the one who did the Dahmer series on Netflix. So he's got a history with Netflix. Josh, what do you make of that statement? It's a powerful statement, and it's literally coming from the sister of the victim here, Kitty Menendez. I mean, that seems like it would carry a lot of weight.
Yeah, it's funny. I also know that I think one of the brothers had also made statements being very critical of that series, which is kind of funny to me because I feel like that series has really drawn a lot of attention to their case and a lot of sympathy to their case. I don't know what exactly they were most offended by in that series, but I watched it. You know, obviously I know that they took some license with some of the facts, but I felt that they tried to be even-handed with a lot of it. I felt like you left that not entirely convinced about where you stood on the whole thing, which I think is kind of one of the reasons why we talk about this case 30 years later. Is one of those cases where people just don't know exactly, how. I know people feel strongly about it, but it's pretty evenly divided about how people feel about it. I guess is what I'm saying, is that I know that myself personally, I can go back and forth thinking about, here you have two young men who are saying that they suffered decades of abuse. At the same time, they shotgunned to death their parents, and by the way, reloaded in the middle of that. So, I mean, you could argue all day long, I think, back and forth on the finer points of where you can fall on that whole thing. But anyways, back to your point, your question to me, it is a curious statement. It is funny to me that the family is still very much involved, and that the family that's, like Chris had pointed out, the family is the family of the victims as well as the defendants, and they seem to be very supportive of the defendants.
Misdemeanor OG here. Chris, to you, why is it possible that producers of there are two documentaries, Monsters and another big one, it's like a 2-hour documentary, the other one's a docuseries, on Netflix right now as we speak, but why is it possible that producers of documentaries, which are often biased one side or the other, are able to influence our criminal justice system? Does this concern anybody? Does it concern you, Chris? And I'll ask you afterwards, Mark.
Well, I guess I'm not sure I completely agree with the viewpoint that it influences the criminal justice system, the documentaries in and of themselves. I think popular culture has an influence on society, and therefore society who decides who goes to jail and who does not on a jury is part of the equation here. Just as we saw with CSI being a television show, at some point when that came out, now all the jurors want to see DNA evidence, and they want to see fingerprints, they want to see videos. Now that you have cell phones, people want to see footage. They don't just believe witnesses' statements as much as they once did. So I think more than anything else, culture influences the way that the criminal justice system works. A particular documentary, I'm not sure, is going to sway a case one way or another, unless the journalists are very, very good at uncovering information that the lawyers and the investigators of the court otherwise did not. And so if it's full of, conjecture and speculation, I'm not sure it matters. But sometimes investigative journalists can do quite a good job of finding out information that other people just could not find out.
And by the way, I told the Orlando Sentinel journalist yesterday, who's here covering the Sarah Boone case, it's the print journalists that do the real work. Us broadcast news guys are we're I'm not going to say it, but the print guys are the real guys. They dig deep. Miss Brazy here gifted 5 Surviving Survivor memberships, and look at this. This is Josh Ritter, Courtroom Confidential. If you have not checked out his podcast, check it out. Josh, is it also? It is on YouTube, correct? But it's an audio platform as well.
Yeah, it's a YouTube channel, and we release it as a podcast on podcast platforms as well.
And what is your most recent episode?
We did a recent episode on the Delphi murders. You know, that is beginning its jury selection this week as well. Then it, coincidentally enough, or maybe not, our next episode coming out next Monday is going to be a special on the Menendez brothers. So I did a lot of research myself on that. I didn't realize this press conference was going to take place tomorrow, but we were just kind of fortuitous in our planning, and maybe we'll have to add some depending on what happens tomorrow.
I don't want to put pressure on you. You might want to stay up till 5 a.m, edit that, and get it out tomorrow. It might do better. So that's my little advice to you. Mark, I want to get to you. By the way, Joel, if and when they're released, would you have them on? 100%. I'm a journalist. Be very curious to talk to them. I'd ask some hard questions. And I'd also talk about the East Brunswick Racquet Club. Shout out to Brad Werner. Coach Werner used to coach us. He seemed like he was, 60 at the time, but I found out he was probably only 8 years older than us. So I think he's still coaching tennis somewhere in the great state of New Jersey. But Mark, just back to this point that Josh was talking about, you've got, this incredible media push out there. You've got 2 documentaries. I mean, these guys are famous worldwide or infamous. What about media influencing these big criminal trials? And you're seeing the same thing with Scott Peterson right now.
Yeah, I do think the OJ trial kind of showed the world that media can matter at a trial, and money can matter at a trial. So, we have good. I know in my part of the world, we have a good defense bar. We're very collegial. We work well together. We have a good system going. So we don't see as much of that, but you have to think when you look at this case, and also the fascination with the Scott Peterson case, that the spotlight of public and media attention can sometimes seem to alter the course of the way these cases ought to go. Without this media spotlight, I have to believe we wouldn't probably be sitting here talking about this case. So, my hope is that, and California has their laws. I understand that they have this avenue that's available to not just the Menendez brothers, but to others to seek resentencing. So we'll see how this plays out. And that's what the voters of California have decided that their representatives will create in their system. I think we'll see tomorrow that the DA is going to probably recommend that they have a hearing to probably resentence downward.
From Leslie. Go ahead, Josh.
Sorry, if you don't mind if I jump in real quick, that I've seen a couple of people comment about this and just what Mark was saying. I thought this was very fascinating, but just realizing the history and the cultural atmosphere in which the second trial of the Menendez brothers took place, after they were deadlocked in the first trial, in between then, Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman were killed. OJ was arrested and put on trial. OJ was acquitted at the beginning of October. 8 days later, the second trial of the Menendez brothers started jury selection. So you had this case that was seen as this real black eye. The first Menendez trial was seen as a real defeat by the DA's office in LA. Then OJ was seen as an absolute travesty in LA to the DA's office. And so going into that second trial, it was like hell or high water. They were determined to get a conviction out of this. I have to believe that had some effect on the way it was tried and the way the judge handled it and everything else.
That's an amazing point. You got to put it in context. I think you're 100% right about that. Not to mention the OJ trial went on for 9 months and then basically completely humiliated the prosecutor's office in Los Angeles. So maybe there was no way the Menendezes were going to get off in the second trial. So context is very important. Joel, since you knew the Menendez brothers, is that what inspired your true crime journalism? No, it's not. But I've always been fascinated. And Chris Lomax, small question to you. What is it about true crime? Like, why are people fixated on these cases? You know, the Menendez brothers, the Scott Petersons, the Karen Reeds. Look, like Boston is literally like in a civil war over Karen Reed. What is it about true crime that does this to people?
I think true crime is interesting because big time criminal acts are things that we all probably fear. And sometimes fear is fascinating, right? People like scary movies. They like horror films. They like Friday the 13th. They like Halloween. But in actuality, no one wants to encounter Freddy Krueger or Jason or any other scary character on the street, but they love to watch it. They love to read about it. They love to experience it from sort of a fantasy perspective and getting close to it. Going back to our point about the dangerous boyfriend or girlfriend, we love the idea of danger until it knocks on our front door. So no one wants to change places with a victim, but we love to hear their story and view it through their eyes, and sometimes maybe even the villain. And so I think that's why people are so fascinated by it.
I'm seeing an interesting comment there, but let's get to this question from Olive Green. Will they still mark? Do you know this? Will they still get their inheritance? I'm not sure what's left. At the time, they were very wealthy. I don't know the net worth. I don't know if Josh does, but will they still get this inheritance? What happens if the beneficiaries are also the perpetrators?
Yeah, we had this come up in a case that I ended up handling out of Memphis, Tennessee, the Nora Jackson case. She murdered her mother. The conviction usually will cut that off. So a conviction for murder, which is even more serious than a wrongful death finding by jury in a civil case, typically will cut off any inheritance from the perpetrators. And in this case, I don't know where they spent $700,000 within some period of time after murdering their parents and never mentioning the abuse and so forth and so on. So I have to believe that door is closed.
Chris, back to you from Reese's mom here with the super chat. We're seeing this right here in Orlando. Sarah Boone is set to use a battered spouse defense, although there might be some legal issues with it, which we're waiting to find out about. But if it can be used for a self-defense plea, why not battered child, which to me is worse? Is there such a thing, Chris Lomax, that you're aware of?
Well, I think it depends on the jurisdiction, but there's certainly an avenue to argue that someone who is in a sort of a custodial relationship has a right to defend themselves, especially if the person is older than them and larger than them. I don't know that there's a specific statute for battered child syndrome that I've heard of, but the notion that a child may be able to defend themselves certainly seems like something that a court would entertain.
Chris, back to you on this one. Do you believe, I mean, I know you don't know these guys personally, but I guess from what you've read, do you believe that they are a threat to society? I see some people saying absolutely not, and others saying that they are worried if they were to get out. How is one supposed to know? I mean, look, obviously the Rosie O'Donnells and the family members you assume have visited them. They've got a certain bias. They're married. By all outward appearances, they seem to kind of have their stuff together. But how is one to know if they're a potential threat?
Under these circumstances, I don't know that there's anything in place that can guarantee us that. Right. I don't know if there's a psychological evaluation that will be performed before they're released to ensure that they are not suffering from some sort of mental illness that could lead them to engage in violence. We talked earlier before about, the criminal justice system and how it works. So there should be, and I think maybe we're moving away from this, a rehabilitative function that the criminal justice system serves. When someone is incarcerated, we hope that they are being treated in a way that when they get out, they are better than what they were before. I don't know that to be the case with these gentlemen. I think being institutionalized for a very long time usually does not make you a better person. And so I'm not sure that they are better than they were when they went in, or that their being incarcerated could have given them even more reasons to act violently towards people when they get out. I just don't know. I would say this, I would be concerned about being around them, given what they did in the past and the trauma that they suffered. Was that erased? Was that addressed while they were in prison? Did they receive the type of counseling and treatment that would enable them to deal with their anger and deal with their trauma if it ever presents itself again in a way that is healthy and safe and keeps everyone around them safe? I just don't know.
Very eloquently stated there. As always, IGG rocks. I'm about to make the panel feel old. When Joel talks about print newspaper, guys, I think of the old black and white movies. A very quick side story. We were at a pizza place the other day, and my 10-year-old daughter, the pizza place has like a faux newspaper, like it's a little press release revealing the pizza ingredients and all these things. And my daughter said, "Wow, I've never seen a newspaper. I cannot believe I'm holding a real newspaper." She said, "Dad, is this what a newspaper was?" Josh Ritter, does this boggle your mind?
It does boggle my mind, but also try getting a newspaper delivered to your home nowadays. It's nearly impossible. All of them are going digital. So I imagine I'm not shocked by the fact that she's never seen one.
Mark Davidson, on the same note, you think you're never going to grow up to be your dad. I can remember my dad saying, "Joel, I remember the Great Depression, apples were a nickel. I used to go to Yankee Stadium for 40 cents. And now I'm telling my kids, Mark, no, I didn't have Google. I had an encyclopedia. In college, I did not, Chris is younger than us, but so he won't understand the pain. I did not have a Google in college. I didn't even have a laptop or a computer for the first 2 years. I was an English major. I used to handwrite my papers and then bring it to a typist. There was a typist, someone who would type your papers, who I paid money to. Mark, do we just become our dads?
Yes. Yeah. And typing was the best class I ever took in my entire life.
I never actually took typing. I don't know why, and I can't type. The COE is a fast typer.
Yeah.
Kudos.
Well, as a lawyer, you need to be able to type really fast.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I don't know what's going on. I think now I'm depressed. The world is going by way too fast. Here are poll results from a poll. That's why they are poll results that the COE put together. I think the Menendez brothers' sentencing should be reversed, free them. 46% should be reviewed. 36% should stay life in prison. 17%. Chris Lomax, are you surprised by the results of the STS poll? We're up there with Rasmussen and other big polls. What do you think of this?
No, I'm not surprised by it. I think there's a growing sentiment around this case that these guys should be released. The evidence, the information, however you want to frame it, of sexual abuse, I think strikes a chord with many people who are considering their punishment. Life in sentence without parole is just about as bad as you can get. It's right below the death penalty. So these guys, even though they committed a horrible crime, if you were to believe what happened to them, as alleged by them, they experienced a horrible childhood. And so I think people look at that and say, well, there has to be some mitigating factor when you line two people up, one of whom commits cold-blooded murder because they want to be rich and they want to take their parents' money, versus another person who kills their parent because they suffered extreme forms of abuse. And I think people are starting to, look at those two things and say, well, if it's the latter, then perhaps life without parole is not the right option here.
Well said. Once again here, Josh, any chance in hell that Leslie Abramson, by the way, people said she was just interviewed recently, I guess, filling up her car with gas. Someone stopped and spoke to her. Lindsay Shea, Chris is so good. That's what I said. The guy is smooth. But any chance that Leslie Abramson shows up tomorrow, Josh Ritter?
I don't know about that, but I imagine if these men are released, I wouldn't be surprised if she takes a victory lap, seeing as how her name is so, indelibly tied to their case. If I could to Chris's point about just kind of the change in looking at these cases. I think another thing that's shocking when you look back at when these trials took place was the media's response to the allegations of abuse that they testify to at the time is really shocking when you look at it from our perspective here today. I mean, they were flat out mocked for it. The late night television made jokes about them. Saturday Night Live did skits about them crying on the stand. And it's like, it's one thing to say whether or not that is, any sort of excuse for murder, fine. But the kind of cultural sensitivity has definitely changed in the past 30 years that if they were tried today, I don't know if the results would be all that different, but I certainly know that the media and legal scholars and people's response to their allegations of abuse would have been treated a lot differently than it was 30 years ago. It's pretty incredible when you look at some of the clips of how they were being ridiculed for their allegations back then.
Yeah, it would not fly today, that's for sure. Samantha Marlman here, excuse me, just like the former prison guard that was on STS, I think we have a former inmate that was on STS. I believe that California prisons are letting everyone out, no space to house the horrible offenders. One more thing after this, and then I promise we'll wrap it up. But Josh, is there truth to that overcrowding in the California state prisons is a big problem? They're just, letting some of these criminals out because there's no other choice.
There have been a couple of propositions that were passed in California in the last few years, in the last 10 years, I'd say, that were to address that. There was a response by the Supreme Court in California that there was perceived to be overcrowding. So they changed some of the laws, and it has then caused kind of this pendulum swing back where now you've got a lot of people that otherwise would be spending time in prison or going to jail on certain crimes have not. There's been a sea change in the way criminal law has been practiced in California, certainly since my time as a district attorney. So yeah, I don't know if it's open up the doors and a flood of people coming out, but there's definitely been a big change in the way that people have been sentenced.
COE, if we know the time of the press conference, let me know. Miss Brazy here with a super chat. I don't excuse what the boys did. However, they've been model inmates. They have said to be really good, upstanding inmates, and the mitigating circumstances considered, I think they serve their time. Just my opinion. There you go. That is one person's opinion. From Trekking 360, I feel like it's easier to understand and advocate for their release if they too were survivors of SA by a close family member. Free them! ! Abby Crossing, no truer statement ever made. The COE is flawless. She is the glue that keeps us all together. One final thing, General Mark. Lyle, again, who was 21 at the time, Erik, 18, they insisted or continue to insist that they carried this out over the fear that their own parents were going to kill them because they felt that the father felt that they were about to out the dad. It was a big record executive. What do you make of that part of this story, that they were doing it out of fear for their own lives?
I find that very hard to believe, and I know some of the viewers think that I seem a bit insensitive on this this topic, but a jury heard some testimony about the abuse. They had a celebrity lawyer. These were not people who were lacking in means to hire a good defense counsel, and the jury heard all that and disagreed with them. Again, this was not whodunit. So, and I would also say to viewers, watching this, maybe some of them have done jury service, but we ask a lot of our citizens to come serve on juries and listen to these cases and invest their time. And sometimes we sequester them and make life very difficult for them. And it's just a bit unsettling to me that our system is designed to work in a certain way. And we have a jury hear this. And I know there's some disagreement about how the judge ruled on evidence, but all of that could have been tested on appeal. And so here we are 35 years later, with people convicted of gunning down their own parents, and we're talking about possibly letting them out of prison because of some letters that have been written. I really want to see a judge test this recommendation by the DA. I hope we at least get a hearing where a judge makes some effort to look at this and make some decision on whether or not this is worthy of resentencing under California law.
What are the chances of that, Josh? We know, not to bring politics into this, but California is incredibly liberal, and so is LA, and it is politically possibly motivated. So what are the chances that this will get a look from, this is much different than Orange County. So what are the chances in LA of a judge putting the kibosh on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's not impossible. I mean, like I said, I still think it's going to land in front of a judge, and a judge is going to have some legal basis for it. The DA could have.
By the way, what kind of, sorry to interrupt, but what kind of judge does this land in front of? Who does this go before?
I think it actually would fall to a trial level judge, because you're asking for a resentencing. So it's not like some sort of appellate question. So I think it would go in front of a trial court judge here in Los Angeles. Maybe the presiding judge here in Los Angeles. I'm not sure logistically who would be assigned to review this, but that judge is then going to have to make a decision, like I said, though, based on the law, because the defense attorneys are going to make whatever arguments they can. The DA may say, what, we've decided using our own discretion that we agree with this, but a judge, whatever ruling the judge is going to make, is going to have to be based on the law somewhere. But that brings up an interesting question. If the judge does decide to go along with the resentencing, who exactly is going to appeal that if they feel that was wrongly decided? Certainly not the Menendez brothers, and certainly not the DA if they're on board. So it may be one of those things where everybody just kind of gives each other a wink and they move on with their lives.
From Mummy Brown, this fear for their own lives is a known trauma response. The jury didn't hear the arguments regarding trauma. People that aren't educated in trauma and CPTSD shouldn't speak on this. It is uneducated. Interesting to hear that perspective. Chris Lomax always bringing the fire. Show number 2 for him, 2 of many. He is a managing attorney at Lomax Legal. Formerly, he worked in the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ. That is the Department of Justice. Thank you for being here again, Chris. And your final thoughts. What do you think happens after tomorrow's press conference?
Well, it seems like we're headed towards some sort of modification of the sentence. I don't know if they will immediately be released. I tend to doubt that. But it seems like they will not spend the rest of their lives in prison, which, everybody's got an opinion on that, but it's going to be ultimately up to the folks who have the power and who are involved. I wish them all the best. It's not an easy situation for anyone, but, we'll see what happens.
And by the way, if they are released, obviously we're going to turn to we have a stable of amazing former inmates, because I am very curious about how they're going to adjust to life on the outside after that amount of time. It seems it's probably maybe easier now because of the technology and the things that are either allowed or sneaked into prisons. So we'll see. But I'm curious about that. The COE posting shows tonight, building thumbnails and getting organized now, but shows should be up in the next 2 hours. It's been a long week for everyone at STS, and it's not even Wednesday yet. You all will know when the shows are. So check out the YouTube channel, obviously Surviving the Survivor. On Instagram, we're at Surviving the Survivor. That's where I posted video of my daughter, incredulous, that she was holding a newspaper, and on Twitter at podcast STS. He is the general, General Mark Davidson. He is a sitting active district attorney in the great state of Tennessee. Mark, will you be upset tomorrow if it is announced that they're going to resentence them to basically being allowed out of prison, to vacate their sentence, essentially? I guess also technically, legally speaking, Mark, how does the judge who ultimately makes this declaration, what is he going to say? I've resentenced them to what? Time served?
Could be. My guess here is that the DA would announce tomorrow that he's going to recommend resentencing, that he's going to recommend that they be released after serving the time that they've served, and that he will then file something. And Josh may correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I assume something will have to be filed in court probably by the DA making the recommendation to get it in front of a judge to presumably have a hearing. And so I won't say I'll be sad or disappointed. I will want to follow and watch to see what happens, assuming that there's a hearing in court, and see what a judge makes of this DA recommendation. I want to make it clear, I think I'm right when I say that the DA cannot just single-handedly get up and announce tomorrow that they're walking out of prison. That's not the way I understand that this is going to work. He can recommend it, and I assume there will be a process and a hearing of some sort, and then we'll get a decision and see what a judge makes of it. So I'll be looking forward to following the story.
Even the general can't make that decision. It's got to go to a judge, even when you're the general. So there you go. Last but certainly not least, he comes to us from Los Angeles, the place where this crime took place. Josh Ritter, he's a criminal defense attorney. Perhaps most importantly, he is the host of an amazing podcast, Courtroom Confidential. He's a former LA Prosecutor of the Year, an award-winning prosecutor. Josh, I want to know why you do not have that award up behind you. It's never too late.
That's a great idea. I should put that up.
Happy to help you. And then look, I told you to stay up late and do your Menendez show tonight. So we'll see if that happens. I'll check it out in the morning. But Josh, going to be a celebrity-driven day tomorrow with Rosie O'Donnell in your city. Are you going to be watching the news conference? And what do you think the end result's going to be?
I will be watching. I think it's pretty remarkable that we're at this point. I mean, I remember this case when, growing up here, it was, I didn't follow true crime back then, but it was something that was just on the news all the time and you knew about it. Funny, interesting fact about this too. I believe this is true, but this was the first case that was covered from gavel to gavel by a fledgling cable network called Court TV, and basically put them on the map. So now you have this case that, kind of launched this whole courtroom observing true crime world coming full circle to the fact that we're actually talking about a reality that they may be getting out of prison is really, really fascinating and remarkable to me. I will be watching. I'm sure chatting about it. I'm sure chatting with you about it again. It's a pretty fascinating thing that we find ourselves here 30 odd years later.
By the way, Kim Kardashian is mentioned in the chat, and she too, I think, has been advocating for their release. And when you're a celebrity of Kim Kardashian's stature, people listen. So who knows? People used to listen to Diddy. Those days are over, I think. Do we know what time the press conference is tomorrow? COE, any idea before I wrap this up? I'm vamping. That's what they call it on TV news. I'm stalling right now until we find out what time tomorrow. You know what? Let's make it easy on us. Just follow me on Twitter at Podcast STS. I'll post it there. Instagram at Surviving the Survivor. Love you, America. Love you, Miami. Love you, Tennessee, the great city, the city of angels, Los Angeles, where this is all going to go down. We are going to stream it live tomorrow. I'm going to be tweeting 1 p.m. Pacific time. He's just making things up, and that was a question mark to throw us all. Yeah, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. We will be streaming it live here, Space Coast on the West Coast, finally has a normal time, because it's happening on the West Coast. And hopefully that does not interfere with playoff baseball. I don't think it will, because then Space Coast will flake out and won't get us a stream. So everybody, have a wonderful night. Tomorrow I will be live tweeting Sarah Boone. There's a motions hearing in the morning that we'll be doing here related to Sarah Boone's case, and then switching over at 1 o'clock Eastern to the Menendez brothers. And we got to get to Charlie Adelson this week. What a week it's been, and it's Tuesday. Someone please help me. Love you all. Guess stick around.